Okay. Great. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of our Coping with COVID-19 webinar series. Today's discussion is around how parents can best support their teens and young adults during these challenging times. I'd like to start by introducing our two panelists. First is Jill Goldberg-Arnold. Jill is a clinical psychologist with over 20 years of experience specializing in work with children and adolescents. She received her PhD from SUNY Binghamton and is currently in private practice in Norwood. You may remember Jill as being our Temple president from 2017 to 2019, and she's also joining us again as our incoming president next week. Jill is also a mother of a teenager and a young adult. Welcome, Jill.
Hi, everyone.
And also on our panel today is Elise Hobby. Elise is a licensed psychologist with over 25 years of experience. In her private practice, she works with adults, college students, and late teens. She was also Temple Sinai's youth group director for 7 years and is a mother of 2 young adults. Thanks for being here, Elise.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
A quick disclaimer before we dive into our discussion. The information that we're about to share is strictly for educational purposes and is not in any way intended as psychological counseling or psychological consultation. Due to the sensitivity of this topic, we're keeping all of our participants anonymous and muted tonight, but we encourage you to ask questions by clicking the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Whatever you type will be sent only to myself and our panelists. So let's get started. First question for you both. Obviously, every single person has been affected by this pandemic. The teens and young adults as a whole seem to be experiencing stress and loss to a greater degree compared with younger children and more seasoned adults. Can you both talk about why you think that is?
Sure, I'll start. I think a lot of it has to do with the developmental level of teens and young adults to begin with. This is a time in their lives when they're really they're supposed to be developmentally pulling away from their parents. Suddenly they're living under the same roof with their parents. They're supposed to be independent, making their own choices, taking their own risks. And all of that has pretty much been taken away from them at this time. So they're feeling a tremendous amount of stress just developmentally because they can't do the kinds of things that normal teens and young adults would be doing. You want to add to that, Jill?
Yeah, I'll echo everything you said, but also teens manage their stress largely through peers, right? That's how they deal with everything that comes up in their lives. And they're out of the context they're normally in with peers. They're not able to hang out in groups. They're not hanging out in basements the way they normally would. So they're missing a massive set of coping strategies. And also they've taken massive losses. So as much as, we've dealt with death and massive economic hardship for people, teens are missing big chunks of rites of passage, things that they look forward to. They can't even look at, leaving for college as kind of a normal experience. So they've actually taken a massive hit in this.
That makes a lot of sense. So in your practices, what are some of the major feelings and fears that teens and young adults have brought up with you?
So I can take that one first. I think anxiety kind of rules the day from my perspective. I think we're all under having tremendous feelings of anxiety with this pandemic. So teens are also worrying about what's coming. What else are they gonna, is everyone in their family gonna be okay? They're not generally worrying about their own health typically, but they do worry about their parents and their grandparents. They're worried about what's to come in their life. They want to know what's next. They want to be able to plan and look forward for things. So they're feeling a lot of anxiety. And they're also, they're irritable. They're grumpy. They're not doing the things they normally do. And so they're not feeling great.
Yeah, I would say that the major thing I've seen from the teens and young adults I'm working with is this real sense of everything Jill said, but also a lack of motivation. They just don't want to do anything because they can't really do the things they most want to do. So lots of them are just sort of hiding away in their bedrooms and watching Netflix and talking to their friends. But even talking to their friends, from at least the teens that I'm speaking to, is even that's declining because doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel as good. And they're tired of having nothing to do. And so they have no motivation. Their parents are asking them, what are you going to do today? Do you have any plans? And they just are like, leave me alone. I just want to be left alone in my bedroom, and I don't want to talk to anybody. So there's just a feeling of malaise as well, with anxiety as well. So it's kind of a yucky combination, I would say.
Yeah.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I think we're all a bit grumpier than normal. What are teens and young adults saying that they need from their parents the most right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think what they're telling me is that they need better understanding, sort of trying to look at things from a teen's perspective, a young adult's perspective. Everybody is struggling, and teens always think that the world revolves around them, and so they are looking for their parents to have a real understanding of where they're coming from, what they're dealing with. Like I said, they want to be left alone. They're looking for space. They're looking to find something that makes them feel like they're still normal. Those are a couple of things that come to mind.
I think they're also, they need to be allowed to be disappointed, to be upset, to feel what they're feeling without being corrected, without being told that there's a silver lining. What teens have said to me is, if one more adult tells me to look at the silver lining, I'm gonna strangle them. It's the last thing they want to hear from anyone. They need structure, but the last thing they want is adults to tell them how to have that structure. And so they're really in a struggle. The little kids, I'm finding, they'll let their parents make them a schedule. No teenager out there wants their parents to give them a list of things to do and a structure for the day. And so there's a real push-pull. Like, they kind of know that they need structure, but they really don't want to be given that structure by adults unless it comes normally, right? The structure of the school day, a structure of a job, that structure, feels good to them. They don't want us to make them a schedule. So it's they need us to listen to them. Other thing I'm finding they need us to get our anxiety and ideas straight. So when they come to us and they want to do something, and one day we say, no way, no way, no way, and the next day that thing's okay. And so I'm hearing that from teens and young adults, especially young adults, who will say, the other day my mom freaked out that I wanted to go sit outside and have lunch with a friend. And then now it's okay that I want to go sit outside and have dinner with my girlfriend. And I don't know how to have that conversation with her, because I get different answers on different days, not based on the data, but based on how my mom feels. And he can see that he knows it's her anxiety, but they don't know what to do with that. So they're needing us to kind of sit and have conversations with them about what guidelines we want them to follow, and then be consistent with it. They're needing a lot from us.
Yeah. The question from the group around letting your teenager have space without letting it get out of control, and that turning into more withdrawal, more depression, more isolation. Can you talk about where that line is?
It's a hard line to know right now. And I think that's what a lot of parents are struggling with is, okay, I hear you, they need space, they just want to be alone, and that usually is something that we look for and say, oh, yeah, that's depression, or there's something going on. Is my kid using drugs? Is there, a problem? And right now, I think we have to look at that differently. And we have to see space as something that teens and young adults really need in their families. This is a whole lot of togetherness for an age group that should be spending more and more time away from their families. So I think when it comes to where is that line, where is it getting out of hand, I think the question is more like, is this depression and how do I know the difference? And I think that right now we have to look at a whole variety of symptoms, not just isolation in and of itself. That's not enough right now to say, gee, I think my kid's depressed. I think we have to look for more signs, things like lack of appetite, crying a lot, an occasional crying. I mean, I'm crying occasionally. Right? I don't like this either. Occasionally crying is fine. A kid who's crying a lot is a kid I'd be a lot more worried about. Other signs of anxiety, lots of worries. Those are the kinds of things I'd worry about more than isolation. The other thing I wouldn't worry tremendously about, which I know drives parents crazy, including myself, is the shift in sleeping time. Lots and lots of teens and young adults are staying up, watching Netflix, doing whatever it is they're doing until 2, 3 in the morning, and not waking up till 11, 12, 1 o'clock. But the reality is, if they don't have a job, if they don't have somewhere to go, that's pretty typical. And it may, in fact, be a way of avoiding having so much time with the family. So they're creating their own schedule. As long as they're getting a reasonable amount of sleep each night, I'm not that worried about it. So those are just some thoughts on that.
And I think the other thing, I think the reverse sleep cycle is something that often causes problems in families. And I'll tell you, at the beginning of the pandemic, at the beginning of the stay-at-home order, all of a sudden my son is staying up till 3 in the morning, but he was turning the lights on and waking me up. And I went to him and said, you can't do it. Like I can't function with my day. And he was receptive to that, because it wasn't because I said so much as when the lights are on in the hallway, I'm just not going to sleep through that. So I think it's also, you have to know your own kid. I'm finding a lot of kids are really wanting, it doesn't have to be depression to seek a therapist. And I think kids are finding it useful to have someone outside of their family to talk to. They are isolated right now. They are. I mean, there's nothing more isolating than being stuck in your house. So I think all of the things Elise said, but also kind of knowing your kid and knowing, is there distress or are our habits just not great? The other thing that I know drives parents crazy is a lot of gaming and video and phone time. And unless there's something else they can spend their time doing, they're probably not going to sit and go through a pile of books this summer unless that's their thing they do. And so our normal things that we use to say, is this a problem or not? My mentor used to say it's a problem when it's a problem. And so if you kind of look at it and say, in this context, is this working okay? If I kind of take my adult sense of what's supposed to be and what's not supposed to be off of it and say, is it okay? Right? If a kid's losing a lot of weight or has big bags around their eyes, there are things that you can look at it and say, this isn't okay, something's wrong. And so you kind of have to use your gut a little bit. When in doubt, call your pediatrician.
Mm-hmm.
They know you, they know your kid. They often have referrals available. We're all in a tough time. It's not a bad time to have someone to talk to.
Great idea.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like it's more around their ADLs. Are they eating? Are they sleeping? Are they showering? Versus like, we're all kind of depressed and anxious right now.
Yeah. Are they flying off the handle when you say, hey, dinner's ready, come sit down, come have some dinner? So I think that's another, if whatever is going on with them is causing upheaval, then it tells you you need help somewhere along the line.
Mm-hmm. Great.
It's also hard because a lot of us are working from home. and our kids don't have the structure that many of us have. So for us, it's like, what do you mean you're sleeping so late? You got to get up, you got to, and it's like, well, what is it you want me to be doing? So we have to recognize, for those of us that are still working from home, our teens and our young adults that are living with us just have very different schedules than we might have right now.
The other thing that we didn't really touch on in terms of what kids need from us, there's this, we've got a pandemic going on, and then we have a massive social justice movement going on that these kids are very engaged in. There's a lot of both engagement and desire to have discussions and really dive into it, but at the same time, a lot of pressure to do that the right way, to post the right way, to, not, they want to do the right thing, and it's not always clear to them what the right thing is on any given day. And there's a lot of pressure there, and they're looking, they're more than anything wanting adults to be a sounding board. They really don't want us to tell them what is and what isn't, but they do kind of need to have a different kind of space to talk some of those things through, and to have a safe space to sort out, how do I think about this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's certainly added stress for teenagers who are living on social media, and everywhere they go, people are angry and debating, and it adds to the stress of what's happening in their lives and how little control they have over it.
For sure.
Jill, you had mentioned earlier the stress that teens experience when their parents are inconsistent with what they can and cannot do. And some of that, I think, comes from the parents' emotional state at that time. But then some of it is that this pandemic is just evolving, and the information that we have on a weekly basis is evolving. And so as the state slowly begins to reopen, and families are now making choices around what they're comfortable letting their teens do and not do, and these choices are obviously individual to each family's particular situation and comfort level, how can parents work with their teens on what these rules are? And how can parents manage the conflicts that will inevitably arise when their child's friends are following different reopening rules than they are?
You want to start, or you want me to start?
You start, Jill. It's a follow-up.
I think they're both. I think there are two sides of it, right? I think most of the kids that I'm having any contact with want to do the right thing. And certainly it's, in some ways, as hard as it was to shut down, it was pretty concrete. We just shut down and stopped doing stuff. And it's actually in some ways harder to go back the other way. We're all watching what's happening in other states where reopening happened too fast. And at least for me, I'm finding it rather traumatic to watch what's happening and know we were there not that long ago, and to be concerned about getting back there. So in some cases, kids they're needing to be able to sit down with parents outside of a request to do something and talk through what's reasonable and what's not from our family's perspective. And there's no safe guarantee, right? Unless you just stay home, which has significant emotional and mental health risks attached to it for many people. There's a lot of space between that and in a crowded indoor space, right? So there's outdoor activities, and kids who are finding, taking bike rides and finding ways to take walks, and finding, the high school kids were meeting in the senior lot and making a circle of their cars, and they would sit on the roofs of their cars so they could talk to each other, but they were pretty spread out. But they're needing to be able to sit down with their parents and say, okay, tell me what's okay. And it's hard for us to do that.
I think that another piece of that is that I think it's best if parents don't just tell their kids, but that it's really a discussion, that there aren't any real knee-jerk reactions, that it's, tell me what you're thinking about, tell me what you want. Let's sit together and weigh the risks and the benefits. And also to leave the door open for change if that is warranted, either because it's gotten too risky. From the beginning of this, my son, who is about to be 21, has, kind of created his own group of 6 or 7 kids, and they were all getting together in backyards and staying really socially distant, and it was always outside. And over time, I don't think they're quite so socially distant anymore. They're still not going in each other's homes, but I know they're not staying 6 feet apart. At the beginning, they were never getting in each other's cars. Now they're getting in each other's cars, but they'll wear a mask. So I feel like we're constantly reevaluating what is safe and talking about it all together. Not trying really hard, because teens hate it when parents are just dogmatic, because I said so, but I think if teens feel that they're included in the conversation and that their needs are taken seriously and that they're listened to, that even in the end, if things don't go 100% the way they want, they can accept that more because it feels like a conversation, and because they feel like their needs and their desires have been heard and taken into consideration. And it is, for all of us, it's an ongoing conversation, right? We all at the beginning just sat in our houses and didn't want to leave and didn't want to move. And now some people are feeling comfortable eating in an outdoor restaurant. Some people are feeling comfortable eating in an indoor restaurant. And every family is going to have to make their own choices about what feels safe for their teens. When we were going through talking about this webinar, Jill, you mentioned that there are some kids who actually could do more, but they're too anxious to leave the house. And I think those kids sometimes need a little push, like, it's okay. You're not going to die if you go out of the house. You just have to be safe, and let's talk about how you can be safe and how we can take safety measures based on the risks for our particular family.
Yeah, I think it's got to be an ongoing dialogue. Teens always do better when they understand the reason, right? I want you to be extra careful and not do that this week because we're going to have a socially distant but still visit with grandma, and we all need to take a little extra caution in the 14 days before we do that. There, and when you point it out to them that way, that, okay, the last thing they want to do is get grandma sick. So there is, they aren't, I'm not finding them to be unreasonable, but they are wanting guidance. I mean, it's hard for us to figure out what's reasonable, what's not, what's safe, what's not, so they also, as much as they want it to be a discussion, they also want someone to just say, here's what's safe. And we can't do that for them. And that causes tremendous anxiety.
Jill, I think one of the things that you shared at the webinar for parents with younger children I found really helpful was just take it in 2-week chunks. You can't plan too far in advance right now because things are changing so quickly. So make a plan for your family for the next 2 weeks. These are going to be the rules, and then we'll sit down and we'll revisit.
And it's hard to get teens to do that because they're thinking soccer season starts in August, but we're supposed to be having captain's practices now. That's normal. Normal is to have captain's practices over the summer, right? And so they're wanting to sort of be able to leap ahead and say, are we going to have, are we going to be able to have our season? Is our season even going to happen? So there are also, I think, times, and I see a question in the chat, there are things that kids are planning, including captain's practices, that it's hard to know what guidelines are going to be followed. And it's hard to know, kids don't want to take a risk, but at the same time, worry about what not going to the captain's practice might mean. And so this is a good opportunity to sit down and have a family discussion about, what are your options? Can you, ride your bike over once and watch and see what is going on? How careful are people being? Can you do your own set of workouts and, let the captains know, I'm going to be doing training, but at this point, I'm not comfortable doing it in a group way. So I think again, it's got to be a discussion of where is that line, and it's, you know, especially when captain's practices are unsanctioned, right? There's no adults there, and so it is, I think it is really hard to know what's, for kids to know what's safe and for parents to know what's okay. And then what is there a disadvantage?
Well, and the other piece is I also think we have to look at all these things in the context of where we are right now in Massachusetts, right now, today. And that could change in a couple of weeks. And I think that's part of what we need to talk to our teens and young adults about is we might make a decision right now based on the information that we have regarding how prevalent is COVID-19 right now. How easy or hard is it to get when you're outside? You know, and if things start, because right now the transmission rate in Massachusetts is the lowest in the country, which is kind of hard to believe how far we've come.
Mhm.
And teens and young adults are, you know, at least in Massachusetts, still very unlikely to get this disease, even though that is happening in some other states. The transmission rate among young adults is much higher. You know, we need to weigh all those things. And Jill, I loved your idea. You kind of sped through it. So I just want to come back to it of what would it be like to go watch a captain's practice and really evaluate, would, you know, for your teen or for you and your teen to say, does that look safe? You know, obviously the most important thing would be no sharing water bottles, no sharing food, et cetera, et cetera. But how do, you know, you have to evaluate safety. And sometimes as a parent, you're going to make different choices than other parents. And it gets harder when you're teens, when you have teens and young adults, because they don't want you to make decisions that are unpopular. And sometimes you're going to have to make those unpopular decisions, and it might put your kid at a slight disadvantage in a sport, and they're going to be mad at you. But that's part of parenting. If you
Or
really feel unsafe and you have to make that choice, then you make it and you deal with the consequences of that. And it's hard. It's very hard, but you can't make your kids agree with you. They might just feel you're being completely unreasonable, but that's okay. They're allowed to think that if they want. And if you need to make that decision, that's still your decision to make.
yeah, and at times they're agreeing, right? And we have, and
Yeah,
then we get to say to them, it's okay. It's sports,
right.
right? There are other things in life, and as much as, you know, sports are supposed to be fun, right? The vast majority of people don't make any money from the sports they've played.
Right.
And so if it's going to make you uncomfortable or put you at risk or put anyone you care about at risk, then it's okay to say, you know what, this may not be my top season, and frankly, I'm not really convinced we're going to have sports in the way that we normally have sports anyway. So, you know, we first have to get through the next 2 weeks, right? And that's why that 2 week chunk makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense, because I don't know about you, but I can't even, it's very hard to fathom what October will look like,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Or August for that
Let
matter.
alone August. So sometimes it's also about saying it's okay to not do that. And it's this balance of it's
Mhm.
okay to not do that, a little push, it's okay to do that, and maybe sometimes a little bit of reining in and saying that's too far over the line. And let's talk about why I think that's too far over the line. The big picture answer to all of this is collaborative conversations and continuing to even look at data together and talk about what we know and what we don't know. And there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a little bit that we do know.
That's great. I have one more question for you both, but I encourage anyone else who hasn't asked a question yet who might want to, feel free to use the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Um, you know, obviously there are so many possibilities in terms of where this pandemic could go. We could have a second wave, everything could get shut back down again, it might not, we could see a hybrid between the two. How much should we be talking to our teens and young adults about this possibility? You know, sort of preparing them for the worst without causing undue stress and anxiety.
So I go back to my 2 week answer that it's useful to them to talk about what matters right now and what decisions we're making right now. And I'm finding that trying to figure out what's coming down the road is fraught with anxiety for the adults and the kids. And so kind of steering kids out of that conversation and back to, let's focus on what we know right now. Let's focus on how to have a good next couple of weeks. Where are the moments of joy? What can we do? What can you do? How can you engage with your friends? How can you do things that feel meaningful to you? And just not go there, because you can't, there's no way to, we don't have a crystal ball to be able to predict. And spinning worst case scenarios is just traumatic right now, because we know a lot of what it looks like. We've seen it. I don't know what you think, Elise, but to me, 2 and maybe even 4-week chunks is about the best you can
Yeah.
do.
You know, I think that the other thing is just acknowledging to these kids, it's so hard not to know, and that we're all struggling with not knowing. And especially for, let's say, high school kids or college kids, there's this sense of sophomore year follows freshman year, and you get to do this in your junior year, and then you're applying to colleges, and everything feels so up in the air. And just acknowledging how awful it is to not know what's coming next, and that we're all struggling with that, and that it's normal to be worried about the things that we might not get to do. But, you know, sometimes I say to people, let's put a timeline on worrying. You can worry about that for 15 minutes and worry your heart out about it for 15 minutes. And then let's like bring it back to where are we right now? Because if you spend all your time worrying about the future, it can be very depressing in a situation like this. So you can't completely block out the worry, but I think that you can manage the worry and be able to talk about it for a little while and then step back and focus on the here and now and what can we do to make right now be okay. If that makes sense.
Sure, that does. Thank you. There is another question from our attendees around a teen, wanting to go on vacation in a different state and feeling very strongly like this can be done safely, whereas the teen's parents are just not comfortable with it and they are just not seeing eye to eye on this discussion. Do you have any advice for parents who are just battling it out with teens over, risk?
So I think it's a good opportunity to sit down and really listen to each other. And I think, like Elise was saying earlier, when we really openly listen to kids, doesn't mean we have to agree with them, doesn't mean we have to do what they're asking to do, but really kind of listening all the way through and exploring with them and letting them know I'm going to be open-minded. It doesn't mean I'm going to agree, but I'm going to really listen to you all the way through. And then maybe that allows you, if you're able to pinpoint some risks that you see that you're not comfortable with, and you've really listened to what it is that these kids are trying to accomplish, right? What's driving this desire? Maybe then you can come to some sort of collaborative, just different decision that gets them to some of what they want, but takes some of the risk out. We're not comfortable doing that, but here's a different path that maybe gets you some of what you want. And I know of a group of teens who normally are at camp together, and they wanted to be able to spend some time together. So they and their families all decided to get COVID tests. They all got tested. They all got their results. And then they all went to one particular house and spent, 10 or so days together. So if you can wrap your head around what are these kids trying to get to, and can we explore together?
Thank you.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's a great response. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for being here tonight. This was, I'm
My
sure,
pleasure.
very helpful for me, very helpful for our attendees as well. And thank you to all of our participants for taking the time tonight. We really appreciate this dialogue. Check back on our Temple website tomorrow. The recordings of all 3 of our webinars in this series will be up. Feel free to share them with anyone who couldn't make it here tonight, but who you think would benefit from this. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for hosting, Amy.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for coming virtually.
Thank you.
Thank you.